Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. If you're using this to fall asleep, get cozy and relax. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Alright, let's get into the story. Back when I was 12, life felt simpler, but the world wasn't any less cruel. The news was heavy with tragedies like JonBenet Ramsey's murder, and Elizabeth Smart had just been ripped from her home. Those stories clung to me, feeding a deep, gnawing fear of being alone in my room. From the day I was born until that point, I'd always slept in my parents' bed, too scared to face the dark by myself. But at 12, I decided it was time to grow up and sleep in my own room, even though the thought of being kidnapped paralyzed me. I was so terrified of the things I'd seen on TV that I didn't even undress in my room. Until that first night, I forced myself to try. My room was on the first floor, with just a living room wall separating me from my parents' bedroom. I had bunk beds. The top bunk was a chaotic pile of my stuff, clothes, books, random trinkets, while the bottom was where I slept. The shadow cast by the top bunk made it easier to see out the window than if I'd had a regular bed. That night, I left the window open with the shade up to let in the cool night air. I think my mom was in the bathroom, which had a clear view of my room, so she might have seen me getting ready. If she hadn't been there, things might have turned out differently or worse. I started to undress, peeling off my shirt when I heard it, the sharp crack of branches snapping outside. My heart lurched, and I whipped my head toward the window. There, framed in the dim moonlight, was a black silhouette of a face staring right at me. No features, no eyes, just a void of a face, motionless, watching. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, staring back at it. Then I screamed, a raw, blood-curdling scream that tore through the house. My dad burst into the room, his footsteps heavy and urgent, but before he could see anything, the figure turned slowly to the left and walked away. Not ran, not hurried, walked, like it had all the time in the world. My dad tried to calm me down, insisting I'd imagined it. "You're fine, Katie." "It's nothing," he said, his voice firm but shaky. He closed the window, yanked the shade down, and acted like everything was normal for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. My mind replayed that faceless shadow, the way it just stood there, unbothered by my scream. The next morning, I became my own detective. I went outside to where the figure had been, standing under my window, and looked up. I tried to piece it together, estimating the height. The window was high off the ground, and I realized the person must have been over 6 feet tall, to peer in like that. My dad's only 5'11", and when I asked him to try, he couldn't even see into the room without standing on something. I told him this, my voice trembling with conviction, but he just shrugged it off, muttering something about kids and their imaginations. 13 years later, I was sitting in my dad's apartment with my boyfriend, recounting that night. The memory still made my skin crawl, and I told the story with every detail I could muster. The branches, the silhouette, the scream. My dad, who'd been quiet, suddenly chimed in. "Yeah, Katie, I remember that night," he said, his tone casual but heavy. I ran out the door to see if I could catch anyone. I saw a guy walking up the street, dressed in all black. Tall, really tall. I yelled at him, but he just kept walking, didn't even turn around. I slept on the couch with a knife that night, just in case he came back. I stared at him, my jaw slack. "You never told me that," I said, my voice sharp with disbelief. He shrugged, sipping his coffee. "You were fine, alive. No need to worry you more." That was my dad. Infinite wisdom, keeping the truth from me to spare my nerves. But hearing it then, years later, made my stomach twist. That figure wasn't just in my head. It was real, and my dad had seen it too. A tall man in black, walking away into the night, leaving me to wonder what he'd wanted and why he'd been watching me. It was late last year, just before the holiday rush, and I was in my room, getting ready to head out to meet my girlfriend. The house was buzzing with activity, My mom, sister, and brother-in-law were all about to leave for a Christmas shopping trip to the mall. As I was pulling on my jacket and checking my phone, I heard my mom call out to me from the front door. Her voice muffled but clear. "We're heading out. See you later," she shouted, the door clicking shut behind them. I glanced at the clock. It was about 10 minutes later when I stepped into the hallway to grab a towel from the linen closet to drop off at my girlfriend's place. I was halfway down the hall, towel in hand, about to close the closet door when I froze. From the back door I heard it, my mom's voice again, calling my name. It was sharp, insistent, like she needed me to come to her right away. My heart skipped a beat. She wasn't supposed to be home. They'd left for the mall, and I hadn't heard the door open or the usual jingle of her keys. The house was silent except for that voice, echoing through the rooms. My dog, Luna, was sprawled on the couch in the living room, right across from where I stood in the hallway. She'd been dozing, her head resting on her paws, but at the sound of that voice, her ears shot up and she leapt to her feet. Her eyes locked onto me, wide and alert, but she didn't move. Normally, Luna loses it when someone comes home. She barks, wags her tail like a propeller, and bolts to the door to greet whoever's there. But this time, she just stood there, statue still, staring at me, then flicking her gaze toward the next room, around the corner from a hallway where I was rooted to the floor. My stomach twisted into knots. No one had walked through the door. No footsteps. No creak of the hinges. Nothing. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me, and my legs refused to move. I want to call out, to ask who was there, but my throat was dry, and the words wouldn't come. Luna's stillness unnerved me more than anything. She wasn't barking, wasn't wagging, just watching, her body tense like she was waiting for something to happen. I stood there, clutching the towel, my pulse hammering in my ears. The voice didn't call again, but the silence that followed was worse. Thick, oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, but eventually I forced myself to move. I crept toward the living room, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. Luna followed me with her gaze, but didn't budge from the couch. I checked the back door. It was locked, the deadbolt firmly in place. No one was there. The kitchen was empty, the lights off, the house as still as it had been when I'd heard the voice. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe the neighbors were outside and their voices carried. But Luna had heard it too. Her reaction wasn't something I could brush off. She jumped up, alert, like she knew something was wrong. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, asking if they'd come back for something. Her reply came quickly. "Nope, we're at the mall." "Why?" My hand shook as I typed back. "Nothing, just checking." But I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. I left the house as fast as I could, locking the door behind me and practically sprinting to my car. The whole drive to my girlfriend's place, I kept glancing in the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following me. Even now, I don't know what scares me more, the fact that I can't explain what I heard, or the fact that Luna heard it too. That moment, that voice, it's burned into my memory, and every time I'm alone in the house, I listen for it, waiting for it to call my name again. About 2 years ago, in August 2014, my husband, who goes by Sco, and I made a big change. We left the chaotic hustle of Los Angeles, California, for a quiet life in a small town in Nevada. For safety and privacy, I won't name the exact place, but I can tell you the population was well under 900. We just welcomed our son, Julius, and decided that a slower pace, small-town life was perfect for raising our family. Jobs were easier to find, living costs were lower, and the calm environment felt ideal for young parents like us. The only thing that gave me pause was how spread out everything was. Our nearest neighbor lived over a mile away. In an emergency, they'd be too far to help. Sco, on the other hand, didn't mind. He's a private guy. and the idea of a little seclusion suited him just fine. So, we packed up and moved in on a sweltering summer day. This story happened just 2 weeks after we settled in. We were still unpacking boxes, trying to make the place our own. It was a warm Friday night, around 11 p.m., and Sko was working a night shift as a security guard at the local bank in town. I was home alone with our 3-week-old son, Julius, who was colicky and fussy. That night, he was inconsolable, wailing no matter what I tried. Rocking, feeding, singing, nothing worked. I was exhausted, my nerves frayed from his cries, and I didn't know what else to do. I remembered that car rides always soothed him, but Sko had taken the car to work. So, I decided to take Julius for a walk instead, hoping the fresh air and movement would calm him down. We had 2 dogs, Titus, a 2-year-old German Shepherd, and Dasher, our 4-year-old Maltese. They were fiercely protective of me and the baby, always on high alert at the slightest hint of trouble. Knowing they'd be with me made me feel safe walking out in the pitch dark, miles from anyone else, with a newborn strapped to my chest. I grabbed their leashes, slipped my phone and keys into my pocket, and strapped Julius into baby carrier. His cries softened slightly as I moved, but he was still restless. I headed out the back door, making sure it was locked behind me, and started down a winding, unpaved trail that began just a few feet from our porch. The path led into a thicket of tall trees, about a 10-minute walk. I wasn't scared. I'd grown up hiking in places like Tangle Canyon and camping in Big Bear as a kid, so the outdoors felt familiar. Even at night, the walk seemed to work. Within a few minutes, Julius's cries faded to soft whimpers, and the dogs, who'd been tense while he was fussing, finally relaxed, their ears perked but their steps steady. I was just about to pass a patch of wild shrubbery and tall grass, right before the trail dipped into firs, when I felt a tug on the leashes. I glanced back and saw Titus and Dasher frozen in place, staring off to the right of the path, their bodies rigid with attention. My stomach tightened. As a woman and a mother, that kind of instinct from my dogs set off every alarm in my head. I whispered softly, trying to coax them forward, but they barely budged. Dasher took a few hesitant steps, then stopped again, her fur standing on end. Titus let out a low growl, deep and menacing, which sent a chill down my spine. He was the gentler of the two, rarely ever growling, so this was bad. I hissed at them to move, my voice sharper now, but my heart was pounding. They crept forward reluctantly, their eyes still locked on something in the darkness. I was beyond terrified. I had no idea what was out there, and even if I did, what could I do? I was alone with a newborn, 2 dogs, and no weapon, no way to protect us. My mind screamed to turn back, to get home and lock the door. Forget this walk. Forget the trail. Forget everything. I turned us around, heading southwest, back toward the house, my steps quick and shaky. We'd been walking for maybe 2 minutes when a figure stepped onto the path right in front of us. The fear that hit me was like ice in my veins, sharp and paralyzing. The figure was small, shorter than me. I'm about 5'2", and this thing was maybe the height of a 10-year-old kid. But what made my blood run cold was a mask it wore, a crude pig mask, the mouth carved into a jagged, crooked smile, smeared with dark liquid that didn't look like blood but still made my skin crawl. We stood there, staring at each other, the air thick with silence. My dogs were silent too, their leashes taut, their bodies poised a lunge. The moment stretched on maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like forever, just me and this pig mask figure locked in a silent standoff. Then, all at once, Dasher and Titus exploded into action, lunging at the figure with snarls and snapping jaws, their aggression almost rabid. The leashes held them back. Thank God, because they would have torn into whoever or whatever this was. But the figure, this pigment, as I'd later call it, didn't flinch. It didn't run or scream like a normal person would. Instead, it tilted its head, looking down at my dogs with a strange, almost curious expression, as if their snarling didn't faze at all. My heart was hammering, my mind racing for a way out. I glanced down at Julius, strapped to my chest, and to my relief, he hadn't woken up or started crying despite the chaos. He was cooing softly, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding. Then Pigman's gaze shifted. It seemed to notice Julius for the first time, its head tilting slightly toward the baby. Something in that moment must have clicked, because it let out a weird, keening wail, a sound that wasn't human, wasn't animal, just wrong. Before I could react, it darted back into the tall grass, the stalks rustling as it moved deeper into the greenery. I didn't wait to see where it went. I turned and ran, hauling ass back to the house, my legs burning with adrenaline. I was still recovering from childbirth, with a baby strapped to my chest and 2 dogs pulling on their leashes, but I sprinted through the near-pitch darkness without tripping or falling. The 10-minute walk took me 3 minutes flat. When I got home, I slammed the door shut, double-locked it, and closed every window and curtain in the house. Titus and Dasher were still on edge, pacing the living room, their ears pricked for any sound. I sat on the couch, clutching Julius, who was miraculously still calm, and waited for Sko to get home. My hand shook as I checked the locks again, my mind replaying that pig mask, that crooked smile, that wail. My dogs were my saviors that night. Without them, I wouldn't have known something was out there until it was too late. If I hadn't brought them, I don't know what would have happened to me. To Julius, they got extra treats and love for months after that. And to this day, I never go outside alone at night. I still don't know who or what that pigman was. I don't know why it was there, what it wanted, or why it ran when it saw my baby. All I know is I'm grateful I got my son, my dogs, and myself out of there alive. That night changed me, and the memory of that mask still haunts my dreams. This isn't my story, but my mother's, and it's one that leaves a bitter taste in my mouth every time I think about it. It happened before I was born, back when she was living in a trailer park that became our first home. The place had a certain charm to it, with tidy rows of trailers and a sense of community, but it wasn't without its shadows. At the entrance of the park, there was a small post office on the right, next to a parking lot where residents could pull in to grab their mail. This story begins on one of those carefree nights when my mom, still young and unburdened by the responsibilities of parenthood, was driving home from a friend's house around 1 a.m. Since I hadn't been born yet, my mom was more relaxed, less weighed down by the caution that comes with having a kid. She decided to swing by the post office to check the mail, figuring it was on her way home. She pulled into the parking lot, noticing a car already parked there, its engine off. She didn't think much of it. Maybe someone else had the same idea. She hopped out, dashed to the mailbox, grabbed the envelopes, and hurried back to her car, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Settling into the driver's seat, she glanced up and realized the other car was still there, just sitting in the dark. It struck her as odd, but she brushed it off. Maybe the driver was reading their mail or taking a moment before heading home. She waited, expecting the car to pull out, but it didn't. 5 minutes passed, the silence growing heavier. Finally, she decided to drive around it, maneuvering her car carefully to avoid getting too close. As she pulled alongside the other vehicle, the driver suddenly laid on the horn, a long, jarring blast that made her jump in her seat. Her heart raced, adrenaline spiking as she caught a glimpse of the driver, a man, his face shadowed, sticking his hand out the window to flip her off. My mom's temper flared. She wasn't one to take nonsense lightly. But something about the situation, the late hour, the empty lot, the man's aggression, made her swallow her anger. She pressed the gas and pulled out of the lot, her hands tight on the steering wheel. As she turned onto the road, she heard the other car's engine roar to life. Her stomach dropped as she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw its headlights glaring behind her, so close it was practically kissing her bumper. The man kept honking, relentless, and she could hear him yelling, his voice muffled but furious, spewing curses into the night. He followed her all the way to our trailer, tailgating her so tightly she thought he'd ram her. My mom was freaking out, her mind racing with what to do. Looking back, she regrets not driving somewhere else. Anywhere else. But in that moment, all she could think of was getting home. To safety. She pulled into the driveway, her hands shaking as she fumbled with her keys. The man's car screeched to a stop behind her, and before she could think, she bolted out her car and ran into the trailer. Slamming the door behind her, she heard him get out, his boots crunching on the gravel, and then he was on our lawn, screaming. He called her a bitch, his voice raw with rage, hurling insults that echoed through the quiet park. My mom, trembling, rushed to wake my dad. Now, my dad's a big guy, the kind of man you don't mess with, broad-shouldered, imposing, with a presence that could silence a room. The second he stepped outside, his silhouette filling the doorway, the man stopped mid-rant. He didn't say another word. He just turned, got back in his car, and peeled out, his taillights disappearing into the night. My mom thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. My dad worked a second shift from 2 p.m. to around 1 a.m., sometimes staying late for overtime and not getting home until 4 a.m. My mom, unable to work because of her non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, was often alone during those long hours, with only our little dog, Mikey, for company. Mikey was sweet but useless as a guard dog, more likely to lick an intruder than bark at one. The man didn't stop at that one night. He kept coming back, driving slowly past our trailer, sometimes stopping across the street to watch the house. My mom started finding letters on our porch, handwritten notes left in the dead of night. She's never told me what they said, but the way her face tightens when I ask makes me think they were bad, maybe threatening, maybe worse. This went on for weeks, the fear creeping into every corner of her life. She checked the windows obsessively, her heart racing every time she heard a car outside. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore and called the police. They tracked the man down and issued a warning. And for a few months, he disappeared. My mom let out a breath she'd been holding, her paranoia easing as the days passed without incident. She started to feel safe again, reclaiming the carefree spirit she'd had before that night in the parking lot. But that relief didn't last. It was a chilly November, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, when she went to her friend's house for a couple of drinks. She planned to stay the night, even bringing Mikey along so he wouldn't be alone in the trailer. Her friend lived out in the country, where the roads were rough and the houses far apart. A heavy snowstorm hit, blanketing the area and making the roads impassable. My mom was snowed in for a few days, unable to get back home. She didn't think much of it until she finally returned to the trailer. When she opened the front door, her heart sank. It wasn't locked. The door was old, easy to push open with enough force, so she tried to convince herself it was nothing. But then she saw the second door, the one inside leading to the living area, was ajar. She stepped inside and froze. The trailer was trashed. The couch was flipped over, its cushions torn. The coffee table's glass surface was cracked, shards glinting on the floor. Nothing seemed to be stolen, but the destruction was what scared her most. It was what the intruder had left behind. Pictures and crude drawings scattered across the floor. My mom won't describe them in detail, but she said they were violent, filled with blood, scenes too horrible to put into words. Her hands shook as she gathered them up, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She called the police immediately, her voice trembling as she explained what she'd found. They came, took a report, and searched for the man, but he was gone. They never found him. A couple of years later, I was born, and my mom carried that fear with her. To this day, if she thinks she sees his car, or anyone who even vaguely resembles him, she hustles me inside, locks every door, and checks the windows. That night in the parking lot, that man, those drawings, they changed her, left a scar that never fully healed, and the shadow of it still lingers over our family. Every now and then, my family and I would pack up and head out for a camping trip, craving the quiet of nature and a break from our daily routines. One particular weekend, We decided to drive about 2 hours from home to a campsite nestled around a medium-sized circular lake. The place was breathtaking, with dense trees hugging the water's edge and serene stillness that felt like a gift. Since it was a Thursday, the campground was nearly empty, with only a handful of sites occupied, which made it feel even more peaceful. About 20 miles before we reached the campsite, I caught sight of a young woman with striking red hair walking along the side of the road. She looked distressed, her head bowed, and I could have sworn she was crying. My heart tugged at the sight, but with my kids in the car, I hesitated. Stranger danger and all that. My husband and I talked it over and decided we'd set up camp first, and then he'd drive back to check on her just to make sure she was okay. We arrived at the campsite and got to work pitching our tent, arranging our gear, and settling in. The lake shimmered under the late afternoon sun, and the air smelled of pine and earth. Just before dusk, as we were finishing up, a car pulled into the site directly across the lake from us. A woman with red hair, the same woman I'd seen on the road, stepped out, accompanied by a dark-haired man. They seemed close, wrapped up in each other, laughing and stealing kisses as they unloaded their gear. She didn't look upset anymore, her earlier distress replaced by a warm, almost giddy energy. My curiosity got the better of me, so I walked over to their site, my husband trailing behind, and struck up a conversation. I asked her why she'd been walking along the road earlier, and she explained with a shy smile. "Oh, we got into a fight," she said, glancing at the man. "I just needed some space, you know? But he came looking for me, so I guess he really loves me." Her voice was light, and she leaned into him, her eyes sparkling. The man, who I'll call Bob, nodded and gave her a squeeze. Meanwhile, my husband and Bob started chatting about fishing. Bob mentioned he planned to do some catfishing that night and hoped they wouldn't disturb us. "My girlfriend gets real excited when she catches something," he said with a chuckle, his tone easygoing. They asked us a few questions. Our names, the kids' names, where we were from. Bob even asked to see inside our Dodge Charger, which my husband was all too happy to show off, proud of his car. I was starting to feel tired, though, and the small talk was dragging on. I dropped a polite hint that we needed to wrap up, and they took the cue, waving as they headed off to chat with the only other campers at the site. That night, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a woman's scream. It was sharp, piercing, cutting through the stillness of the campground. I nudged my husband, my heart racing. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He groaned, half asleep, and mumbled, "Yeah, Bob said his girlfriend gets loud when she's fishing. It's probably fine." His words didn't sit right with me, though. The scream hadn't sounded like excitement. It was raw, almost desperate. I slipped out of the tent, the cool night air prickling my skin, and peered toward the docks by the lake. The moonlight cast long shadows, but I couldn't see anyone. No figures moving, no lights flickering, nothing. The campground was silent again, and I tried to convince myself it was just the couple messing around. Still uneasy, I crawled back into the tent and lay there, listening for any more sounds. Later that night, I was stirred again by strange noises, rustling, then the faint beam of a flashlight sweeping past our tent. I held my breath, straining to hear more, and then there was a splash, like something heavy hitting the water. My mind brushed it off as typical camping sounds, maybe an animal, or the couple still out by the lake. I didn't sleep well after that, the unease lingering like a weight in my chest. At daybreak, I was ripped from sleep by more screaming, different this time, frantic and full of grief. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached. I scrambled out of the tent, my pulse racing, and what I saw next I'll never forget. Taped to the side of our car was a note, scrawled with all our names, mine, my husband's, even our kids'. At the bottom was a single word I didn't understand, something cryptic and unsettling. I ripped it off, my hands trembling, and looked around. Bob and the red-headed woman's campsite was empty, their car, their gear, everything gone. Across the lake, the other campers were gathered near the dock. their faces pale as they spoke to the police. I ran toward the commotion, my stomach churning. And that's when I saw it, the police pulling a body from the water. It was a red-headed woman. Her lifeless form draped in a tarp as they carried her to shore. The officer said her throat had been slit. Her body dumped in the lake sometime during the night. My knees buckled, and I clutched the note in my hand, the words blurring through tears. We were questioned by the police, and we told them everything we could. The conversation, the scream, the note, but it wasn't enough. Bob, or whatever his real name was gone. Weeks later, I was going through photos from the trip, trying to piece together what had happened. I found one I'd taken of the kids by the lake, smiling for the camera. When I zoomed in, my blood ran cold. In the background, across the water, you could just make out Bob in his car, his face partially visible, staring in our direction. The realization hit me like a punch. He'd been watching us, maybe planning something even then. That note, with our names and that strange word, felt like a warning or a promise. The memory of that trip, of her scream, of her body in the water, haunts me still, a reminder of how close we came to something unthinkable. I've only shared this story with a few people outside my family, and it's only recently that I've been able to talk about it without my stomach twisting into knots. I wish I'd spoken up sooner, especially after learning a coworker had a similar encounter. I worked downtown, standard 8 to 5 hours, with occasional overtime but not often. On the day this happened, it was just a regular workday, and I left the office a few minutes after 5 p.m., the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city streets. The walk from my office building to the train station is short, just a few blocks, passing by a couple of bars and back alleys. The worst I'd ever dealt with was the occasional homeless person asking for cash a bit too aggressively, but they never really bothered me. The train ride from downtown to the station where I park my car takes about 40 minutes, and if I'm lucky, I snag a seat instead of standing the whole way. That day I got lucky, or so I thought. I found a window seat, perfect for zoning out with my music. I was listening to a playlist on my iPad, earbuds in, when the train pulled into the next stop. 3 men boarded and took seats nearby. One sat right next to me, and the other 2 sailed across from me, facing my direction. I didn't pay much attention at first, just kept my eyes on the window, the city blurring past. But I started to notice the guy next to me inching closer. He'd shifted his seat, his leg brushing against mine, and when I'd scoot away, he'd slide closer again. By the time I was pressed up against the window, my shoulder jammed against the glass. I knew it wasn't an accident. He had plenty of space on his other side, more than a few inches, but he kept crowding me. I was wearing sunglasses, which let me glance at them without being obvious. Every so often, one would say something, too quiet for me to hear over my music, and all 3 would look at me, their eyes lingering. It was creepy, the kind of uneasy feeling that crawls up your spine and makes your skin prickle. I tried to stay calm, but my nerves were buzzing. I dreaded getting off at my stop, worried they'd follow me, but mine was the second to last station on the line, so I hoped the crowd would give me cover. When the train finally pulled into my station, I stood quickly, clutching my bag, and moved toward the door. The guy next to me reached out, his hand grazing my arm, but I was already moving, slipping to the crowd and onto the platform. My heart was pounding as I glanced back. They were getting off too, their figures weaving through the other passengers. I told myself it was a busy station, that they couldn't know where I parked, but the fear was real. For context, I park in the furthest lot from the station because it's free, saving me a few bucks each day. It's about a 7-minute walk, which is usually fine, but that lot is quiet, almost deserted in the evening. I'm not exactly in peak shape. Working an office job, sitting all day, and indulging my sweet tooth left me about 30 pounds overweight. I hadn't exercised much since high school, where I ran track and played hockey. Now, I play in a women's daytime hockey league with my mom, but it's more for fun than fitness, and I'm the youngest on the team by a good 20 years. If it came to running, I doubted I could manage more than a 30-second sprint before gasping for air. As I crossed the pedestrian bridge over the road from the station to the parking lots, I noticed the three men behind me, less than 10 feet away. They weren't hiding it. They walked with purpose, their footsteps heavy on the bridge. My pulse raced, and I tried to think of what I could do. I didn't carry a knife, though I own a legal-size one, and pepper spray is illegal in my Canadian city. I remembered a personal protection class I'd taken in high school, a requirement for girls at my private school. I slipped my car key and house key between my fingers, gripping them like makeshift brass knuckles. If I had to hit someone, it'd at least hurt. The men followed me through the main parking lot, their presence unmistakable. The more nervous I got, the louder they laughed, their voices carrying in the quiet evening. I crossed the road to the far lot, my steps quickening. They had to pause for a couple cars to pass, which gave me a slight lead. I was halfway across the lot when I heard their footsteps again, pounding the pavement behind me. I broke into a run, my lungs burning, my bag bouncing against my side. I hit the unlock button on my key fob as I neared my car, wrenching the door open and diving inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as they reached me. They surrounded the car, banging on the windows, their fists thudding against the glass. They were yelling, jeering, their voices a chaotic blur of taunts and laughter. One guy stood at the back, pounding on the hatchback, blocking me from reversing without hitting him. I was screaming, my voice raw with panic, but the lot was empty. No one was around to hear me. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. I thought about the screamer my mom had given me for protection, but it needed a new battery, so I hadn't brought it. Then it hit me. When you're being attacked, you don't scream for help. People ignore that. You scream fire, because everyone wants to see a blaze. I slammed my hand on the car horn and triggered the alarm. The sound was deafening, a shrill wail that echoed through the lot. It was so loud inside the car I thought my eardrums would burst, but it worked. The men flinched, stepping back, their faces twisting in surprise. I saw people entering the lot, drawn by the noise, their heads turning toward my car. The men noticed too, and they bolted, running back toward the train station, their figures disappearing into the dusk. I drove home sobbing, my hands trembling on the wheel, the adrenaline still coursing through me. The next night, I started working out. I've exercised almost every day since, determined to never feel that helpless again. I've lost 20 pounds and gained muscle, but the bigger change was mental. The encounters shattered me, amplifying anxiety I'd struggled with for years. I ended up quitting my job, unable to face the train ride or the walk to that lot again. If those cars hadn't delayed them at the road, if I'd run a little slower, if I'd fumbled the lock, it could have ended so differently. I still carry that fear, a constant reminder of how close I came to something I can't bear to imagine. In 2008, at the age of 20, I took a big step. I moved out of my parents' house with my 2-year-old daughter, determined to prove I could stand on my own. It was a bold move, maybe even a reckless one, but I was stubborn and wanted to show the world and myself that I wasn't just leaning on my parents because I couldn't hack it. I found a place in a vibrant part of town, right next to the university campus, and an artsy district filled with galleries and cafes. The neighborhood was stunning, lined with grand Victoria homes that sold for over $1 million. Their wraparound porches and stained. The apartment I rented was in a small building tucked among these beautiful houses, and the area felt safe and welcoming. The neighbors were friendly, the streets quiet, and the community had a tight-knit feel, with an active neighborhood watch. In the 2 years I lived there, the only trouble was a single incident of car break-ins, and even then it was just unlocked vehicles. No smashed windows, no real damage. It was a kind of place I'd always dreamed of living in, despite the inconvenience of being a 15-minute drive from the suburb where my parents lived. I worked nights and my mom often babysat. so I spent a lot of time shuttling back and forth. This story starts near the end of my second year there, around May 2010. I was outside on a warm spring day, cleaning the tall windows of my ground floor apartment and wiping down the cheap black iron patio furniture I'd picked up from Target. The windows were high, and since I'm short, I had to stand on one of the chairs to reach the upper panes, stretching my arms to scrub away the grime. That's when I noticed something odd, a single set of lip prints on the glass, way up near the top, too high for me to reach without the chair. I frowned, annoyed, assuming some drunk friend of the neighbor had stumbled over during a party and planted a kiss on my window. It seemed like the only logical explanation. Who else would be out there pressing their lips to my glass? I made a mental note to keep an eye out for more prints, but they never appeared again, which cemented my theory about the drunken neighbor. Now, here's where I cringe at my own naivety. Looking back, I know I was young and dumb, but even that's no excuse. Because of how safe the neighborhood felt, I often left my blinds open at night. My apartment was laid out in an L shape. The living room, kitchen, and bedroom in a straight line, with a bathroom off to the side of the bedroom. My daughter's bed was closer to the interior wall, while mine was at the far end, right by the window. I love how the morning light filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns across the room. It was beautiful, and I looked forward to waking up to it. But leaving those blinds open was a mistake. One that makes me want to curl up in shame. There's more. My daughter, who was 4 by then, sometimes slept in my bed at night. She'd crawl in, her little body curling up next to mine, and I didn't mind until around the 4th of July when she stopped. When I asked why, she said something that sent a chill through me. The tall man watches me sleep. I don't like it. My daughter was known for saying creepy things. She once told me about a ghost baby pig named Baby Pig Ghost who was sad because people tore him apart, and how other ghost pigs wanted to hurt me. So, when she mentioned the tall man, I chalked it up to her vivid imagination. It was unsettling, sure, but I didn't think there was an actual man watching us. Still, her words stuck with me, and to ease her fears and my own growing unease, I started closing the blinds at night. Most nights, I was up until 3 or 4 a.m. anyway, thanks to my work schedule. So I figured we were fine. But then came the night that changed everything. The one that sent me to therapy and turned me into the most paranoid person I know. It was early August, and I'd gone to bed earlier than usual, exhausted from a long shift. My bedroom door was open as always, and the blinds were down and closed, though the string was finicky, leaving a 2-inch gap between the bottom of the blinds and the windowsill. The apartment was dark, all the indoor lights off, but the patio light outside cast a faint glow through the window. I woke up randomly, my eyes blinking open in the stillness. I reached for my phone to check the time. 3:07 a.m. I groaned, annoyed, knowing I'd struggle to fall back asleep. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I looked toward the living room, and that's when I saw it. The silhouette of a tall figure outside my window, visible through the gap in the blinds. He was completely still, a dark, looming shape against the patio light. My heart stopped, my breath catching in my throat. I stared, frozen, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, that it was just a trick of the shadows. But then he moved. He sat down in one of the patio chairs, the faint creak of the metal making my skin crawl. I was paralyzed, every muscle locked in terror. I wanted to grab my phone, to text or call for help, but I was terrified he'd see the glow of the screen or hear me whisper. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, motionless, and I started to doubt myself again, thinking maybe I was seeing things. Then he stood up, stepping closer to the window. He paused, his silhouette growing larger, and leaned down, his face pressing close to the glass, peering through that 2-inch gap. He stayed there, bent over, his head unmoving, for an impossibly long time. I squeezed my eyes mostly shut, terrified that if he saw me looking at him, it'd set him off, make him break in. Finally, he straightened up and walked out of view. My heart was still pounding when I heard the screen door creak open, the sound sharp and the quiet. I held my breath, praying you wouldn't try the knob, but the door was locked. Thank God I wasn't that careless. Then I heard the screen door shut again, and after that, nothing. No footsteps, no shadow returning to window. I checked my phone again, my hands trembling. It was 11:48 a.m. I'd been lying there, frozen, for hours. I slid out of bed, my legs shaky, and crawled to the bathroom, where I promptly threw up, the fear overwhelming me. I stayed there, curled up on the cool tile, until the sun came up, too scared to move or make a sound. When daylight finally spilled to the windows, I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained what I'd seen. 2 officers came, and we stepped outside to talk. That's when I saw them again. The lip prints, right where they'd been before, high up on the window, in the same spot. The police took photos and filed a report, but there wasn't much else they could do. I never slept in that apartment again. With the police report, I was able to cancel the lease renewal I'd just signed and move back in with my parents. My independence traded for safety. That night broke something in me, left me jumping at shadows and triple-checking locks. The image of that tall man, his face pressed to glass, still haunts me, a reminder how close I came to something I'll never fully understand. This story belongs to my mom, but its shadow stretches over me and my siblings, a lingering unease that's hard to shake. It began in the early 1970s in South Florida, where my mom grew up. She was a senior in high school, full of the carefree energy of youth, when she met a guy at a wedding. He was the drummer in the wedding band, a few years older, with that cool, mysterious vibe that made him the kind of guy teenage girls swooned over. They hit it off instantly, sparked by a playful moment when he complimented her saddle shoes, the one she wore with a retro dress that made her feel like she stepped out of a different era. Their connection felt electric, and before the night was over, she gave him her home phone number. They went on 1 or 2 dates. Nothing serious, just casual outings filled with laughter and the thrill of something new. He'd call her regularly, and she'd sit on the kitchen floor, the phone cord stretched taut, chatting about music, school, and whatever else came up. Everything seemed fine, normal, even exciting. But one night, their phone conversation took a dark turn. Out of nowhere, his tone shifted, and he asked her questions that made her skin crawl. Have you ever thought about killing yourself? And do you ever think about murdering people? Her stomach twisted. The air sucked out of the room. Shocked and deeply uncomfortable, she fumbled for words, her heart racing. She ended the call as quickly as she could, her hands trembling as she hung up the receiver. That was it. She cut off all contact, refusing to answer his calls or see him again. As far as she was concerned, he was out of her life for good, or so she thought. Fast forward to 2012. I just graduated from college and was lingering in my college town, finishing out my lease while working and figuring out my next move. One day, my mom called me, her voice tight with worry. Something weird had been going on, she said. She told me she'd received a letter from the drummer, the guy she'd known briefly in high school. Until that moment, she'd never mentioned him to me, my siblings, or my dad. Not a single word about those dates or that unsettling phone call. She explained who he was, how they'd met, and how their brief connection had ended with his creepy questions. The letter was unnerving. It acknowledged her life now, her marriage, her kids, her happiness, but it named each of us, me, my siblings, my dad. He even mentioned where my dad worked. My mom was rattled, her voice shaking as she read parts of it to me over the phone. She had no idea how he'd found her. After high school, she'd gone to college in another state, where she met my dad. They married, quickly graduated, and moved to yet another state, then another after my 2 sisters were born. Her married name was different. Her life disconnected from that South Florida girl in saddle shoes. She'd never been on social media, and when she had us, she stopped working, so her name wasn't floating around online. If you Googled her, you'd find nothing. But somehow, this man had tracked her down, decades later, and new intimate details about her family. Then she mentioned something else. Her college's alumni association had contacted her, saying a man had been calling on and off for months, trying to get her contact information. They hadn't given it out, bound by privacy policies, but the calls were persistent. When she told me his name, a chill ran through me. I'd seen it before, on a Facebook friend request and a Twitter follow request. So had my siblings. We'd all brushed them off as random, but now it felt like pieces of a puzzle snapping together. Mom, who's never touched social media, asked me to dig into his online presence. I started searching, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I pulled up his profiles. I found a MySpace page and a Reverb Nation account filled with his music. Terrible, low-quality recordings that sounded like they were made in a garage. One song stood out. It was called Victoria, my mom's name. The other tracks had generic titles like Summer's Day, but this one was personal. I sent her the link, and though the audio was rough, the lyrics were clear enough to make her blood run cold. He sang about her saddle shoes, her beauty, details from their brief time together 40 years ago. These weren't old songs. They'd been recorded recently, the timestamps fresh. My mom freaked out, her voice trembling when we spoke next. How could he still be thinking about me after all this time? She asked, her fear palpable even over the phone. I kept digging, my curiosity mixed with dread. I found a website he created, dedicated to freeing Amanda Knox, the woman accused of murdering her roommate in Italy. At the time, it seemed alarming, though I've since learned her innocence is plausible, so I don't dwell on that part. Still, it was bizarre, another red flag in a growing list. My dad, when Mom told him everything, didn't seem fazed. He's always been the calm one, shrugging off things that would send others into a panic. But my mom was different. She was terrified, refusing to stay home alone after learning this man knew their address. She confided in a family friend, a private investigator, who offered to look into the guy. What he found only deepened the mystery. The man had changed his last name and moved across at least 5 states in the past 20 years, living under different aliases and working wildly different jobs. A musician here, a salesman there, a handyman somewhere else. There was no clear pattern, no stability. The investigator couldn't do much since the man hadn't made any direct threats and had no criminal record. But the name changes and constant relocations were troubling. To this day, he still pops up, sending friend requests to me and my siblings. His profile picture's always slightly different but unmistakably him. My mom remains on edge, her paranoia flaring whenever a strange car lingers near the house or an unfamiliar name appears in her mailbox. I've thought a lot about who this man might be. Part of me wonders if he's dangerous, maybe even a serial killer, his obsession with my mom a piece of a larger, darker puzzle. But another part of me hopes he's just a sad, lonely man, mentally unstable and fixated on a fleeting moment from his youth. If that's the case, I hope he gets the help he needs. Either way, the fact that he found us, that he knows our names and where we live, keeps me looking over my shoulder, wondering if he'll ever stop watching from the shadows. I'm a 32-year-old guy, over 6 feet tall, weighing about 180 pounds, and my life's been a mess lately. I'm in the middle of a divorce, and my soon-to-be ex-wife moved out of our house a while back. I put the house up for sale and relocated to an apartment, trying to start fresh. But things took a darker turn recently. I was physically assaulted by someone hired by my ex, leaving me with 38 stitches, a concussion, and a hospital stay. I'm banged up, weak, and in no shape for much of anything right now. For safety, I haven't forwarded my mail or updated my address to the new apartment. Instead, I use a P.O. box, keeping my whereabouts as private as possible. That detail matters, and you'll see why. It was a quiet evening, and I was sprawled on my couch, half watching a baseball game, flipping through channels to distract myself from the throbbing pain in my head. The TV was already on low, barely audible, when my doorbell rang around 8 p.m. I froze, I wasn't expecting anyone, and none of my friends had mentioned stopping by. My first instinct was to ignore it, so I turned the TV volume down even further and stayed still, hoping whoever was would leave. 5 minutes later, the doorbell chimed again, insistent. My heart picked up, but I forced myself to move, tiptoeing to the door to avoid the creaky floorboards near the entrance. Peering through the peephole, I saw a petite woman, maybe in her mid-20s, about 5'5", standing there. She looked harmless enough, her expression calm, almost friendly. I slid the chain lock into place and cracked the door open just enough to talk. Before I could say anything, she greeted me by name, her voice bright and confident. "Hi, your name?" I didn't recognize her, and my brows furrowed. And you are?" I asked, my tone guarded. She smiled, holding up a pie, the kind you'd see in a bakery with a golden crust. "I'm your neighbor, Alicia. I live in C2, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the hallway. C2 was the apartment across the hall, and one over diagonally to the right. I glanced past her, noting I could see the door to C2 from where I stood. Something fell off, but I couldn't place it. Hesitantly, I undid the chain, took the pie, and looked down at it, the warmth of the dish seeping through the foil. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice sharper now. She let out a giggle, high-pitched and almost too cheerful. "One of your pieces of mail accidentally ended up in my box," she said, waving an envelope in front of me. I squinted at it. A plain, personal letter addressed to me, with my name and my new apartment address handwritten on the front. No return address. Nothing official like a bill. My stomach tightened. "I don't get mail here," I said, my skepticism clear. She giggled again, unfazed, and handed me the envelope. "Oh, I just moved in," she added, as if that explained everything. "I've met the guy who lives in C2, but I've never seen you there." I pressed, my eyes narrowing. She just smiled, extending her hand for a shake. "Like I said, I'm new. Nice to meet you." I reached out, my grip weak from the assault and my general wariness. I'm usually all about a firm handshake, no wimpy ones. But this time, I barely managed a limb clasp. Her grin widened, her voice rising slightly as she said, "It's nice to meet you." When I didn't respond, her tone dropped, almost mockingly, and she added, "Neighbor." She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering a moment too long, then locked onto mine with a blank, unreadable stare, with a little wave. She turned and walked down the hall toward the elevator, not back to C2. I stood there, pie in one hand, letter in the other, watching her disappear around the corner. I tossed the pie in the trash, my gut telling me not to trust it. Then I opened the letter. It was unsigned, the contents vague and meaningless. Random ramblings that didn't connect to anything in my life. The only accurate details were my name and address, which was chilling enough. I locked the door, checked the windows, and tried to shake the unease, but it clung to me. Things didn't stop there. I moved out of that apartment as fast as I could, but I did it quietly, strategically. I sold my biggest furniture pieces on Craigslist, coordinating with friends to pick them up and store them at my new place, so no one would notice a moving truck. I used different friends for each item, ensuring no pattern for anyone watching. But Alicia, she kept showing up. She started leaving notes on my truck, handwritten scraps with cryptic messages. She'd pop up at places I frequented, like my favorite coffee shop or the gym, always with an excuse. She'd make friends with people outside my circle, getting herself invited to events where I'd be, her presence a constant shadow. I stopped going out, avoiding public places, my world shrinking to avoid her. I finally went to police, my nerves frayed. I handed over the notes, the letter, everything I had. They issued a restraining order, and a third party notified her. But she didn't stop. She kept finding ways to appear, like it was a game of cat and mouse, and I was the prey. The night before I officially moved out, the front desk staff called me in a panic. Alicia had entered the building with two men, moving quickly, like they were on a mission. They went to the north elevators. The clerk said, her voice shaky. I'd been using the south elevators to avoid her. So I grabbed my keys, ran out of my apartment, and took the south elevators to the lobby. The clerk let me hide in the office behind the desk, and we called the police. I waited, my heart pounding, as the cops arrived. They searched the building and found my apartment door open, but no one was inside. Alicia and the men were gone. They'd been in the building for at least 20 minutes, but the police couldn't find them. They said they didn't have the authority to knock on every door, though they didn't explain why. The officers escorted me back to my apartment to check for missing items, but I'd already cleared out most of my stuff. All that was left were some clothes for the next day, a drink, and a bag of chips. Nothing was taken. I grabbed my things, threw them in a duffel, and left. To avoid being followed, I borrowed a friend's car, leaving my truck behind. The police watched from a distance as I drove away, wearing a hoodie to keep a low profile. They stayed for 15 minutes, monitoring for any cars tailing me, and reported no suspicious activity. That weekend, I sold my truck and bought a new one, cutting ties with anything that could link me to my old life. I moved a couple of hours away to a new town, and I haven't gone back. But even now, I'm not sure it's over. My gut tells me she's still out there, watching, waiting. I hope I'm wrong, that it's just a trauma talking, but I can't shake the feeling. I check my locks, scan parking lots, and glance over my shoulder everywhere I go. Alicia, or whoever she really is, left a mark on me, and I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe again.